All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Kaylee. I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First. We are just one of a few feminist bookstores left, and we're so thankful that you're spending an evening with us to celebrate Michelle's luminous essay collection, Like Love. Tonight, she'll be in conversation with Megan Steelstruck. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events in the store with a land acknowledgement. Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. A few logistical things. In just a few minutes, I will introduce Michelle and Megan. Michelle will read from Like Love before being joined by Megan for conversation and questions. If you would like to ask a question, there is an Ask a Question button down at the bottom of the screen. So you can put all of your questions in there. Next to it, there's a big Buy the Book button, which will take you to the Women and Children First web store. Michelle will be signing and personalizing books to go out later this week. So if you'd like something, now is the time to do it. And the event will run about an hour. So now I'm so excited to introduce our guests. Megan Steelstruck is the author of 3 collections, Everyone Remain Calm, Once I Was Cool, and The Wrong Way to Save Your Life. She is currently a 2020 Shearing Fellow at the Black Mountain Institute in Las Vegas and a 2021 Civic Media Fellow with the Annenberg Innovation Lab at USC. And then Michelle Marrano is the author of the travel memoir, Grammar Lessons, Translating a Life in Spain. Her essays and short fiction have appeared in many journals and anthologies, including Best American Essays, Fourth Genre, Ninth Letter, and 21st Century Essays by Women. She lives in Chicago, where she chairs the English department at DePaul University. Please join me in welcoming Megan and Michelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Megan.
We wanted to start just by thanking Women and Children First. This community has supported Michelle and I as writers long before we were ever published. They put books in our hands. They put us onto microphones. They let us know that our voices have value, and that's why we kept going. And we hope that all of you will also keep going. We need you. We're trying to remake the world. Y'all have been working so hard. You deserve a present. There is a link right below me where you can purchase Michelle's beautiful book. And while you are there, you can get 1 or 2 or 20 other books to help keep this vital store a thriving part of Chicago. I want to just take a moment and acknowledge the history that we are all walking in right now. I know that some of you listening are involved in organizing and rapid response. Some of you are teaching under very difficult circumstances. Some of you are trying to make rent. Some of you are caring for others, including seniors and small children. And we hope you find some time to take care of yourselves as well. I think we often put our own selves second or third or 10th. And if you see yourself in that sentence I just said, I invite you to take a moment and breathe. Michelle made us a space to talk about the messy and delicious and complicated ways that we all love each other in this very beautiful mess of a world. And I can't imagine a more timely subject. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Michelle, will you read for us to start off?
I would love to read. Yes, thank you so much. I first want to add my thanks to Women and Children First. It's my neighborhood bookstore. It's a place that I love and that I appreciate. And I have personally found, independent bookstores just to be the lifesavers right now. It was really, really painful during that period, at least in Chicago, when we were not allowed to go into bookstores. And I'm very happy to have that back now. And so just want to give a shout out to independents and to Women and Children First. And I also want to thank Megan. I'm so honored. I love Megan's work. I have her book here alongside mine, and you should all get this, The Wrong Way to Save Your Life, and the previous one, When I Was Cool. She's a fabulous writer and a very big-hearted writer, and I always learn so much, Megan, when I'm reading your work, and it helps me just sort of rethink life. So I'm really delighted to be here. So this is a book, I think, as many of you know, that is about unconsummated romance. It's about not all, but many of the strange crushes, infatuations, entanglements, odd encounters that we have that are romantic, but have no future, but have no sort of physical aspect to them, perhaps. And laced through the essays on that topic is a kind of series of essays about my adolescence. It was a time in my life when my family broke up, and when my mother and I broke up. My mother was sort of the first great love of my life, and we had this really major breakup, and found our way back to each other again eventually, but always in a sort of fractured way. So that's an overview of the book, and I'm going to read from the essay that actually began the book. It doesn't begin it literally, but it's where the book sort of came out of, the idea for it. It's an essay called Crushed, and it's about an experience I had when I was teaching gifted and talented adolescents in a summer program. And I developed an honest to God crush on a 12-year-old boy who, by the way, looked 10. So the essay is, because I won't get far enough into it right now for you to see this, but the essay is kind of implicitly asking the question, if one isn't actually a pedophile and finds one in this sort of a situation, what does desire mean? What does one want from crushes in general, but from this particular one? Crushed. There's a certain way with certain boys, how they walk a little lopsided, leaning into one another, how they grimace when their heads go back, laughing to the sky. While their friends wait in the hall, shoes screeching against the tile floor, these boys pack up slowly, smiling under their bangs. They say, "Have a good afternoon," and "Looking forward to reading Montaigne," with no sense of irony. Then they hoist their heavy backpacks over one shoulder, give a quick salute, and are gone. At a certain age, 12 to 14, by 15, it's over. These boys are dangerous. Outside during morning break, they sidle up, leaning into me the way they lean into each other, sensing how I love being in the middle of them. One in particular, Eli, takes my hand, adjusts my grip on the frisbee, cheers when my toss reaches the far birch tree. He likes teaching the teacher. At academic summer camp, where the overachievers go for fun, boys like Eli talk about literature, about the pieces they're working on, with an earnestness that throbs. In the cafeteria at dinner time, carrying trays piled with tater tots and chocolate pudding, they ask me to settle a bet. What's Hills Like White Elephants really about? Their eyes drop to the floor, feet shift back and forth. At night, they come to me in dreams. And in the morning, when I step into the classroom and their heads turn toward me, eyes sleepy, I am shy. Most of the summer writing students want to be in fiction workshop. I teach its prerequisite, personal narratives, although I have no idea why this course should come first. We read Virginia Woolf, James Baldwin, Joan Didion, and talk about developing a literary consciousness, about what it means to tell the truth, about memory and imagination, craft and technique. But nothing worth writing about has ever happened to me, they sometimes whine. The drama is in the way you think, I insist, and the dangerous boys nod their heads and grin. We spend most of each day in a small carpeted classroom, 15 students, the teaching assistant, and me. We sit around an enormous seminar table where we discuss readings and do writing exercises. Every other day, 3 students distribute drafts for the whole class to critique, making the close quarters even more intimate. By the end of the first week, it feels like a month has passed. In the evenings during study time, I walk through the girls' dormitory first. The girls are 12 and 13 and 14 too, but they seem older, less vulnerable. They have breasts and long legs, and some are so beautiful it's hard to look at them, hard to look away. A few apply makeup expertly and braid their hair into intricate patterns, but I don't compliment appearances. Instead, I say, I like the way you think. Push that idea further. Bring it up in class tomorrow so we can all learn from you. This pleases the girls, but what they really want to talk about is the boys. They want to know if I'll tell so-and-so that so-and-so likes him, if I'll relay dares and threats about tomorrow morning's Foursquare match. Nope, I reply, no flirting by proxy. And the girls fall out laughing, squealing until the RA threatens to write them up. The next dormitory is quieter. Up and down the halls, boys read and write and goof around silently. I make myself at home, sitting on a chair here, a bed there, and taking what they offer. Twizzlers, Cheetos, coffee nips. Eli's roommate received a care package today, and Eli gives of it freely. He just turned 12, the youngest in the class, and he sits beside me on the narrow bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like some kind of professional, and asks about the college students I teach. What are they like, he wants to know, and what am I reading for pleasure? He shows me a wooden duck his grandfather carved in a bracelet he wove during afternoon activities. He opens his laptop to essay number 1. What do you think of this beginning, he asks, and I'm not kidding, it's stunning. The joke at Nerd Camp is you can tell new instructors by who doesn't show up to lunch the first day. That's what happened to me 3 years ago after a friend whose recommendation counted for more than it should have got me the job. I had no idea how much these kids would know, how eagerly they devour lesson plans. I come from the kind of working class public school background few of them share, so it didn't occur to me that by 7th grade they'd be versed in classical mythology or able to analyze a Van Gogh painting with lightning speed. On that first morning, my class ate through 2 days worth of lessons. I spent lunch hour planning how to get to 3 o'clock. Now, halfway to a PhD in English and grateful for this recurring summer job, I'm used to adolescents who know more than I do about calculus, molecular biology, the timelines of historic battles. And I'm also used to student writing that might be great for 7th grade, but isn't on its own impressive. There's a slight perverse pleasure in knowing that in one area, in my area, these kids don't necessarily excel. So Eli's opening paragraph takes me by surprise. I haven't had time to teach him yet. During the first workshop, we discuss essays about a pet goldfish that died, a baby sibling who arrived like an angel from heaven, and a father who left his family for another man. About the goldfish and the sibling, there is much to say. Great descriptions, so relatable. The same thing happened to my fish. I listen for a while, giving the shy students time to participate, and then ask, what's this essay really about? I look around the table, meeting their eyes. Let's talk about ideas. The students gaze back. Some sit up a little straighter, others twirl pens, snap gum, toy with the colorful bands on their braces. In a moment, ideas start to come, and before long, even the author's conceding that the fish hadn't meant much to her, even at the time, but the ritualistic burial gave the backyard an aura of the sacred. When we turn to the third essay, the one about the gay father, silence fills the room. I glance at the clock, prepared to wait a full minute before intervening. At the 30-second mark, which is much longer at a workshop table than elsewhere, the teaching assistant Tina shifts in her chair and widens her eyes, begging me to intervene. I realize she's right, that the silence can't go on so long that the witty, awkward boy who wrote the essay starts to squirm. But just as I'm about to speak, Eli clears his throat. Okay, well, I thought this was really brave and really moving. I mean, I got a little choked up at the end. He gives the author a quick smile, then flips through the pages, cocking his head to the side. But Eli's face tightens with concentration. I wanted to see more of your father, especially before he told you he was gay. I wanted to spend time with him so I could feel your sadness when he left. The author nods with the heady excitement of being taken seriously, and 3 new hands go up in the air. Watching these students, children really, with their oversized t-shirts and budding acne, hold a mature conversation, speaking directly to the bespectacled boy who both loves and resents his father, moves me almost to tears. In Eli's room that night, I tell him what a great job he did in workshop. He nods and looks at the floor, lips pressed together against a smile. We're sitting side by side on his bed again, and I have the strong urge to drape my arm across his shoulder, pull him close, touch my lips to the short brown hair above his ear. I'll stop there. Thank you.
You're welcome. Imagine that this is the sound of 60 people clapping for you. Thank you for that. Just as a way to start off, I was really struck right when you were introducing the essay, when you said that this particular piece was also the beginning of the book for you. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that and how this kind of formed over the years.
Yeah, I think that, I'm always writing a lot of essays about different things, but this one really stayed with me, and it took a long time to write. I kept making passes at it and then setting it aside for a while and coming back. And when I finally got it finished, I felt like there was something that I wasn't done with on this topic. And it didn't have to do with this particular experience, but on this idea of crushes. And then I started looking at some of my other essays and just thinking about my life and experiences I've had and seeing a pattern of, there are lots of other patterns too, but one of the patterns is this kind of, this unconsummated romance, this way in which we come into often short but very intimate proximity with other people, and sometimes struggle to know what to do with that. It can feel shameful. It can feel sometimes a little bit wrong. It can feel dangerous, make your palms sweat. And whenever I'm writing and I get to something that makes my shoulders start to do this, I know that I'm onto something really interesting. So I started thinking more about that and writing up various of the other experiences.
It's like the big idea you were telling the kids about. So after you figured that out and started writing up the other experiences, I'm just interested in the process of putting this collection together. Did you already have some of these written? Was there the realization of, okay, that here's what's missing that I have to dig into?
Yeah. So at the same time, I really wanted to write this larger story about my mother, and about this notion of a mother as the first great love of one's life, and sometimes the first heartbreak too. And so I wanted to play around with that, and I had written some of these. Yeah, some early drafts of some of these pieces came in as far back as graduate school, long before any of this was a possibility. So there were a few of those that I kind of dusted off and brought out and took another look at and then completely revised. And initially, I just knew that I had all these essays and that it was already book length and I probably didn't have room for much more, and I didn't really know how to organize them. So I initially organized them in chronological order, and it didn't really work at all. And I sent it to the editor for my first book and a wonderful mentor of mine, Karl Klaus. And he said, well, maybe you could get rid of all of the adolescent stuff and just leave the other essays. And I could see why he said that. And I did it right away. And then I looked at the manuscript and thought, this isn't what I'm trying to do. And so I haven't succeeded yet in finding an organization. And then I started thinking about, why do I want to put all of these together? Like, why is that my impulse? And I think it was because what I'm really interested in always, always, always is time and memory. Memory is the thing that just obsesses me and that I fixate on all the time. How we remember things, how memory changes over time. How it accumulates, how it gets revised. And so I wanted to create a structure that would mimic the way that we move through our lives, having experiences, but always going back to some story or set of stories that are influential in how we're behaving and understanding and making sense of our lives. Mm-hmm. So then I created a structure that kind of toggles back and forth between the adult stories and the more adolescent, and the adolescent sort of into adulthood stories with my mother. They go in chronological order, but the rest of it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. I literally have like 30 questions for you simultaneously that are all hitting my brain at the same time. But if we can, I want to talk about form for a minute, because I know that there's so much of this wrestling that we do when we're writing the projects and trying to figure them out. And then when we have to figure out how to explain the projects to the world. And I have heard, like I've been doing a little bit of research on how this book is hitting the world. And I've heard it described as an essay collection. I've heard it described as a memoir, and I've heard it described as a memoir in essays. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what you think of these genre distinctions, and if there are things that you take into consideration when you're making the work, or where does that live for you?
Right. So I really wanted to write a memoir because I had the idea that that would be easier than writing an essay collection that acts like a memoir, which is what I did with my first book. I thought if I could, initially I thought if I can find some way to create a coherent sort of voice and sensibility, then I can tell whatever stories I want to tell. And it just didn't work at all, because for me, the pleasure of writing is excavating an experience and having a form kind of organically come out of that, suggest itself to me and suggest a different kind of framework or lens through which I can look at it. So I'm really an essayist at heart, I think, but there also was a little too much of a connection between these pieces. For it just to be an essay collection. It really did feel memoiristic. So I just wanted to split the difference and call it both.
I love that. I love that. What do you want us to call it?
I think it's a memoir in essays. I think it does function as a memoir in essays, but I also am comfortable with essay collection. I don't think I could easily just call it a memoir, because I expect a little more cohesion from something that is labeled. On the other hand, who cares? Like, I don't care what anyone calls it. I just care what the reading experience is like. On the one hand, I think genre distinctions don't matter at all. But on the other hand, I think that when you're in there doing the work, they matter. They get it. You do engage with the questions of what is this that I'm making?
Right. And I think it matters too when we're thinking in terms of the truth. I was interested in what you just read from Crush. There's a line where you're explaining to the kids what it means to tell the truth. And I'm interested too, that the very first line we encounter in the book is, "This is a work more of truth than fact." So again, as a longtime practitioner of creative nonfiction and as an educator in the form, and certainly in a world right now where fact is under attack in I was just going to say in a certain kind of a way, but actually in very, very direct and clear ways. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you engage with truth. I might be a little bit too sober right now to actually have the whole what is truth conversation. But I do think it matters in the forms that we're making and in our current cultural dialogue.
Yeah, I think it matters too. And so, but I also think, and this is what's really hard, it's hard to have this conversation right now because we're at a historical moment in this country where nuance is something that so many people cannot grasp at all. And so everything gets reduced. And on the one hand, I think that truth changes. Right? The way we understand something changes, and the way we understand truth changes. At the same time, it doesn't change at all. The truth is the truth and it doesn't change. So I want to have it both ways, but that requires a lot of nuance and a lot of kind of sitting and mulling things over and thinking about. That's a little bit different from fact, right? I mean, fact is something that I think is verifiable. And when we're talking about memory, so much is not verifiable, right? I mean, we remember things and maybe we got it wrong, but I think it's still really important to tell the story of memory and not to drive oneself too crazy trying to verify everything.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you just said about just even wanting to sit and mull over and think about some of these moments from our lives and how that isn't even a luxury that we seem to have right now in the world. Everything is moving so fast. It's just like there's one thing after the other so quickly. And the Chicago poet Parnisha Jones talks a lot about how art freezes time. And just to say, okay, I feel like my news and journalistic work isn't about slowing down and really thinking and dealing in these complexities.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. And I think, unfortunately, we are losing the ability to separate out what is news and journalism from what is art form. And so the same expectations are being brought to everything. And I think that's really dangerous and unfortunate. And I think that art does allow us the luxury, as you said, to be reflective and to look at, to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at once, you know, and understand that they can actually both be true.
Yep. I think it also, and this is a big thing that struck me in rereading the book over the past couple of days, is how it can expand and get into the complexity. And I guess that this is part of telling the truth as well too, but get into the complexity of a definition, right? Like so much of the work I feel like is you just wrestling with love, which is often like such a, we're given such a binary definition of that term. A moment that really struck me is when you were a kid and your mother said to you, "Hey, do you know what queer means?" Mm-hmm. And you sat and rolled through all of these definitions in your head of what you understood on a personal level of that word. And then you were thinking about how that related to the Barbies in your closet. And then just the line at the end of the paragraph was just about how if it hadn't occurred to you to let the two Barbies kiss, then what else in life, what other truths in life hadn't occurred to you? And that was one of those moments as a reader. I know I'm talking a lot and we want to hear from you, but one of those moments as a reader where I had to put the book down and take a couple laps around my apartment and just be like, shit, what just happened? And just that moment of like the realization of a child and how deeply it affected me as an adult. And so what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is just this idea of coming of age and how that is so often meant just as children and teenagers coming of age, but how you are engaging with that as a grown-ass fucking woman.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is really a book that could be described as a coming of ages book, you know, that there are, because we have this notion that coming of age means, you know, moving into adulthood and then you're in adulthood and here you are. But adulthood, it takes, if we're lucky, it takes a really long time and it has a lot of parts to it and a lot of phases. And it can be really destabilizing and to move from one phase to another. But those are also times when, you know, that can engender these tremendous reflections and deeper understandings of who we are and creation of new desires and new directions. And also, we then bring all of that back to the past and to memory, and we rethink what we understand, and our truths get larger and deeper. But I think we don't often couch it as coming of age, you know, once we're in adulthood.
Yeah. And I think that this comes back to what you were saying before about genre distinctions, right? Like memoir or essay. And I heard John Edgar Wideman speak once, and he said that genre distinctions exist so that people who work in bookstores know where to shelve things, right? Yeah. And I think like coming of age, it so often feels to me like, hey, here's how I'm going to explain the thing.
Right.
As opposed to here I am engaging with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, back to what you were saying earlier about, and again, like how does the childhood parts move forward and tell one story between the more adult realizations? And I really admired the book structurally and how that order, how the more adult experiences and realizations informed how I was reading the childhood stuff, right? Like it's in the second essay that we read about you leaving for the first time with your mom, and then it isn't until 6 essays later that we learn that that you left a second time.
Yeah.
That she left a second time. And so again, in thinking about those orders, was it intentional in the structure of all of that about where the adult parts were following the younger parts?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I played around a lot with structure, but again, I really wanted to, I guess in one way, what I was trying to do is enact for readers that experience of revisiting the past and coming to new and deeper understandings. The more that you know about the adult stories, then when the adolescent stuff comes up again, like you just said, you're carrying that later knowledge back to it. So it's an interesting thing, the way that memory works when we read, right? It's kind of like, we're almost talking about something that's akin to flash forwards, which are like flashbacks, but they go into the future. And the way a flash forward works is so interesting because once you have an experience, if it's a big and impactful experience, you can't remember back to what happened just before that without going through the experience, right? You forever lose the access to, this is one of the things, you know, about trauma that's so painful, is that you forever lose the access to the pre-trauma. And I'm not saying that this is a book about trauma, but I'm just using that as an analogy. But when you use a flash forward in writing, you can offer the readers the pre-time, and then you can move them forward into the future, and then bring them back, and they can only go through what happens afterwards. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like that's kind of happening over and over again in the book. Like, we keep revisiting my relationship with my mother, but we see it, you know, as I'm a different person at each stage of it, remembering back.
Right. As we're talking about structure of the whole book, I want to pull it in a little bit and talk about some of the structure of the individual essays, because there's all sorts of just really like breathtaking experimental work going on in form here. There's an essay that's told in 12 acts. There's an essay that is kind of a nod to the Tim O'Brien text, I think, How to Tell a True War Story. And the whole last essay, and I totally geeked out over this, is told in the third person. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the form of individual essays and how that discoveries comes to you.
Yeah. So again, I really try to allow each piece that I'm working on to develop and to find its own organic form. And so, for example, the one you're talking about in 12 acts is Ars Romantica, or A Dozen Ways of Looking at Love. And this is an essay that's about just a very brief period of, like, all takes place in about 4 months of when I was living with a guy and started seeing another guy, but the guy I was living with was away during the week, and my next door neighbor, who was my landlord, was this retired artist who was just this amazing guy. And he had this lovely partner who lived away also. And so on the weekends, we would do our own things, but during the week, we would get together for dinner, not every night, but, you know, regularly enough. And it started to feel like we were dating in this very platonic, but very exciting way. And I wanted to write about that because through all of that craziness of the kind of the love triangle, he's the person who really stayed with me from that time. And that relationship was the one that I really wanted to dig in and try to understand a little bit. And so I was trying to figure out how to tell the story and how to tell it so that it wouldn't just be kind of a straightforward chronological narrative, which didn't seem very interesting. And I was thinking about, he was so interesting because he had been a lifelong painter who then developed macular degeneration, so he couldn't see the details. So in his retirement, he completely retrained himself to be a sculptor. And he made these really large sculptures because he couldn't, again, see the detail, but he could see the kind of large stuff. And so I was thinking a lot about how we frame our lives, you know, and what are the frames that we construct and look through, and how could I apply different frames to this relationship to sort of dig at why was it so important to me and why has it stayed with me as so meaningful, even though it was very brief. And so and in the meantime, I was doing a lot of research into neurobiology and how the brain works and what the physiological responses are to crushes and infatuations and romance. And so it kind of all came together as looking at these different ways of looking at how we understand romantic attraction.
thinking about how amazing it is of like what our memories hold. Like I'll read back through some of my own like my old journals, and I'll be like, and then it's over, and I'm never gonna get over him, and I do it. And sometimes, I'm just like, I don't even know who I was talking about.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But some of these seemingly small things had the most profound impact.
Right. It's funny because I do a lot of traveling and write about travel, and I teach travel writing. And one of the interesting things about travel for me is that I never know when I'm on a trip what is going to be the material that stays with me. I don't know what's going to stick. You know, like sometimes something happens and I think, oh my God, I'm going to write about that for sure. And then when I get home and start to write, I'm bored within half a day. Like, I don't really, but then something that just was like a little toss off, I never expected that to stay with me, is still in there coming back to me as I go through my daily life. And I think it's similar with relationships or just any weird little experiences. The ones that pop up over and over again and revisit us are kind of asking to be dealt with, I think, asking to be looked at under a little bit of a microscope and understood. And I think it's often because they hold clues to who we are and how we live. And in the midst of living, we're not always cognizant of asking those questions. And we're not always thinking about the who am I question as something that is going to get a different answer every time you ask it. Right? Like that the self is malleable and changing. And so I'm always drawn to these experiences that ask us to pause for a moment and take stock.
Yeah.
I mean, what do I believe that's different now than what I believed then?
Okay. I want to freeze that idea in time right now. Real quick to all my dear friends here who are watching us, I see some people are starting to drop some questions into the little ask a question link right below my face. And I'm gonna ask one more question to Michelle, and then I'm gonna come into those questions and start to ask her some of your questions. I know that there are many of Michelle's students and colleagues here and longtime readers, so I want to make sure that you have space to be in dialogue with Michelle as well too. So get yourself into the ask a question section. I'll be there in a hot second.
Okay.
But just again, this idea of how we're living right now, and you are releasing a book about love into a world in a very, very complicated time, and I'm wondering how you are. First of all, are you okay? I'm wondering how this is affecting your writing. I'm wondering how this is affecting your conversations about the writing and the thinking about the book in particular.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. I'm fine. We have our little bubble here in Chicago. My partner Kevin and our son Andrew and I, we're all working from home. We're all in the house all the time. And I'm aware every day that we are incredibly fortunate in a million ways. This is not an ideal situation at all. But I'm fine. I'm driven pandemic wise on a personal level. I'm fine. I'm driven crazy on a daily basis by the political situation in the country, and I'm spending all of my extra time right now writing postcards to voters in certain districts, and doing all those things that we do. In terms of how it affects the writing, I think probably the way it affects a lot of people is that there are kind of ebbs and flows. There are days when you're just completely exhausted and overwhelmed, and it takes a while to go, oh yeah, we're living in a pandemic and I can't do 3/4 of the things I would like to do, or I'm just out of sorts trying to remember all of the steps that I have to take to keep everything safe, everyone safe. And then other days, I just want nothing more than to throw myself into a project and, think only about that, at least for a few hours. So I think it goes in every direction.
Okay.
Can I throw that question back at you?
Oh, God. Yes, just real briefly. I'm in Las Vegas right now. I feel very far away from some of my communities. So it's so lovely to be here virtually with you all tonight, with you, Michelle, and with you, Chicago. I love you, Chicago. I miss you. But I feel similarly. I think if I were in Chicago, my body would be in the street much more. But I am still learning my streets here, and I'm still learning. I'm finding my people as we do. But I think that conversations like this, and certainly the online classes that I've been teaching, are a lifeline in ways that I'm only beginning to understand, let alone articulate. And so for all of you listening right now who are still showing up to make work and to engage with stories, I think that stories help us see each other. And so thank you for still showing up. Thank you for being a part of that. Michelle, so I have a question here from Natanya. It's thinking of the Bernard Cooper essay, Burls. Is he a writer in your pantheon?
He is.
Who do you especially admire? Who are your essay writing teachers? I'm going to take notes on this one as well, too.
Oh, goodness. Now, why am I not completely prepared for this question? I love Bernard Cooper. Yeah, absolutely. The people I learned from are, the classics, Joan Didion, James Baldwin, all the people who teach you not just about big ideas and the importance of having something at stake and of taking things on, but who also teach you about rhythm and about phrasing and punctuation and controlling the musicality of prose. The people I'm reading right now are, I'm going to plug a wonderful book by Sejal Shah, which is newly out, called This Is One Way to Dance. And another by Joanna Eleftheriou, This Way Back, which is an essay collection about identity and is really beautiful. I have amazing colleagues at DePaul, Miles Harvey, Barry Jean Borich. Their work inspires me, and I know they're both here, so I'm happy to say this. And also the conversations that we have and the teaching that we do. I have such a long list of people who I love to read, and I'm actually afraid to start talking about them. Abigail Thomas, Kyoko Mori, all kinds of people, because I don't want to leave anyone out. Thank you for that question.
We will find your syllabus published on the internet, and then we will all know where to read. Next question. Can you talk a little bit about the way art affects or influences your writing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It does influence my writing. I mean, I feel so blessed to live in Chicago and to have access to such amazing art, both at the big places like the Art Institute, but also at smaller galleries. And, certainly teaching at a university, having really constant access to the amazing work of colleagues and of students. I think that art, music, any of the creative arts is essential, just sort of to put yourself in a place where something is happening that you are really attracted to but don't entirely understand. That to me is always the most stimulating, exciting. I see, an art installation, and I think, what is that? Or you can do that? Or, and then I carry it away and I want to go and make things myself. So yeah, I think this seems like such a pedestrian answer and so obvious, but engaging with I just think all kinds of human creativity is just inspiring. Oh, that was a terrible answer. I'm sorry.
No. Okay. Next question. I'm loving this. Keep them coming, y'all. Okay. One thing, and this question is from Megan, not me, Megan. Megan Ritt. Hi. Also, Megan. One thing I always struggle with is how to know when an essay is done. Girl, me too. How do you decide when your essays are done? And done is some heavy lifting has happened in here, Michelle, because it's in quotation marks. Is it different? And is it different when you're working on a collection?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my essays are done and not done, done and not done all the time. I think that's true for everybody who writes. Sometimes, and you think an essay is done, you send it out, maybe it even gets accepted, someone's going to publish it. And in the meantime, you've gone over it and said, no, I need to revise this completely. Sometimes it's just simply done when it's in the book. And that's it. You have a deadline. You have to turn the manuscript in. You don't have any more time. But I think it's important not to kind of stew in our own juices. One could revise forever. So I think it is, one thing I do, and Megan, I'd be curious if you do the same thing. I'm always working on multiple pieces at one time. And that's partly because when one gets hard, I can quit and go to another one and say, this is going to be easier until it happens there again. But somehow doing that allows me to get the distance that I need to be able to look back at something and go, okay, this is done. It's kind of done everything I wanted it to do. And then I just edit it to death. So that's the part that's harder to relinquish. But I think it's just a matter of asking yourself, what am I really trying to do here, and have I done it? That first question is hard to answer because I often don't know what I'm really trying to do until I've written the essay and am now revising and revising and revising.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about how where I want the work to live, right? Like what dialogues are happening where I would like to make a contribution to that dialogue, right? Which is how I look at publishing, right? And so I've started to ask myself these different places where I'm sending my work, how do they influence a final rewrite, right? Because I'm going to get something, like if I make a decision, I'm sending this to New York Times versus I'm sending this to Long Reads versus I'm sending this to Brevity, that's going to change my understanding of the question, how is this done?
Sure.
Right? So it's either I make whatever the hell I want to make and then I have to find the home for it, or I find homes where I want to be a part of the conversation and I need to figure out how the final rewrite lives in that, like with the style, tone considerations of that particular home. I also think back to, Tina Fey said this thing when she was writing for Saturday Night Live, and she said, we don't ever put anything on air because it's done. We put it on air because it's 11:30.
Right.
And I have a Post-it note up over my desk, and I just got here to Vegas. It was the first thing I did is I wrote a new one on the Post-it note and I stuck it up here. It just says it's 11:30.
It's 11:30, right?
I'll just sit and mess around with the work.
Yeah.
Forever.
Right.
Forever.
Right. Yeah. But also I think I do want to say really quickly for the writers who are listening, I do think it's really important to remember that we have a way for some reason of thinking that our writing is completely caught up in who we are deep down inside and that our soul is invested in it, right? And so sometimes we can't, it becomes difficult to finish a piece because we're thinking like, I haven't perfected myself yet. And people are going to judge who I am deep down inside, right? And so with my students, I always say, imagine that we're in a ceramics class, right? So you make a bowl and it's a little lopsided. No one's going to look at the bowl and say, well, clearly that person doesn't deserve to live, right? Or doesn't, it's just a bowl. So an essay is, you just have to go and make it and remake it if you need to, or, straighten it out or something. But we can try to, I think to the extent that we can try to detach it a little bit from our value as humans, then it becomes easier to finish things and to let them go into the world and to do exactly what you're saying, to think a little more strategically in terms of where is this going to live and how is it going to converse.
Yeah. I heard this brief anecdote, and I want to apologize to all the academics in the space because I should be able to cite my source right now, and it's just gone right out of my head. But it was a photographer who she made self-portraits, and she was at one of her own shows, and she was standing next to the self-portrait, and a person in the crowd came over and pointed at the self-portrait and said, "Oh, is that you?" And she was like, "Oh no, that's a portrait." And it, like, I heard that and it seemed to take all the pressure off of me as a personal essayist of this piece that I'm making is not me. I get to grow and change and make new work all of the time and see my life in different ways.
And you get to grow and change and disagree with what you wrote.
Yes. Yes. And
right?
I think, and especially, and I think as women, we don't, especially women and other folks from different marginalized communities who haven't always appeared in literature, like
yes.
we have less of that permission. And so to my writers in the space, Michelle and I are here saying, make what you want to make.
Right.
And you get to grow and change. Mm-hmm. Okay, Michelle, here I'm back in the questions. Elena Ferrante talks about, oh, I love this, butchering eels. I love butcher as a verb. Oh my God, the question just jumped away from my face. Oh, here, about butchering eels, getting into the dark and murky subconscious memories. Okay, this is the money shot, Michelle. Can you speak about how you have managed your feelings about sharing your eels with your family and friends who are in the essays?
Yeah, so that's always the tough question. You know, I've taken the coward's approach to some degree because I didn't share with either of my parents the essays I was writing about them when they were alive. I kind of waited them out because in my family, and you know, the book goes into these stories, my mother left my father for a woman in the mid-1970s at a time when this wasn't done. And there was a custody battle that ensued because of her being unfit. And there was a reconciliation. She left again. At that point, I stayed with my father. So our family really fractured. And there was so much secrecy around that. There was so much that we couldn't talk about that just became like these deep kind of festering, centers that we kind of danced around. And it really was impossible for me, at least for any of the people I was up until the time of my parents' deaths, to confront that with them. There are other people in the book who are real people. A couple of them are here on this event right now, who I ran essays by. My brother, I gave the entire manuscript to, and he was very generous in acknowledging that it was my story to tell and that he remembered some things differently. And he gave me a couple of notes about facts that I had gotten wrong that I was very grateful for. So I think that for me personally, I think that there are, generally speaking, had my mother lived much longer, I probably could have gotten my way around to sharing this with her. And I think she would have been furious at first. And then I think she ultimately would have probably been flattered by the role that she plays in the book. Although I don't think she would have been very happy about me telling her stories. Mm-hmm. And I think my father would have just never accepted that one can tell family stories, that's just a breach of loyalty that he would never have condoned. Mm-hmm. And it would have been very, very painful for him. Mm-hmm. But I think that, you know, generally speaking, I counsel students not to run away from material because they're afraid of presenting it to real people. I think that one of the really powerful elements of nonfiction is that it forces us to think from our own perspectives and to imagine our way into other people's perspectives as well. And in the process, to be more honest than we could otherwise have been. Mm-hmm. Really thinking about our own selves and our complicity in certain situations and our own bad behavior and our mistakes and all of that. And I think that often real readers are happy, might be too strong of a word, but content maybe to feel seen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about what it means to tell personal stories in this particular time and of this particular time. Mm-hmm. I spent this week engaging with personal stories on the internet of what Justice Ginsburg meant to many people in this country. I spent this morning listening to a press conference put on by the family of Breonna Taylor and listening to activists and family members speak about what she meant to them in particular. And I spent this week re-engaging with your work and thinking about a greater complex definition of love in this world. Mm-hmm. And I was very grateful for your voice and all of the voices that were engaging in the personal stories of what all of these different things in the world meant. And I'm thinking about how our personal stories are so deeply entwined with what's happening culturally and politically in our country. And that's just kind of my personal setup for the last question I have here, which is, how are you feeling about releasing such personal stories into the universe this particular week?
I mean, you know, in some ways as a writer, you know, you finish your project, you submit your final manuscript, and then what happens, right? And you don't have any control over that. Certainly it feels like there are a lot of reasons for people not to care at all right now about the kinds of stories I'm telling, given everything that you've just talked about. And yeah, you know, there are bigger, more important stories. But I also think that timeliness is not in some ways relevant to what I'm doing, right? I mean, you make this kind of a book and you put it out into the world, and it comes into readers' lives when it comes into their lives. And if it hopefully does some good and helps someone think in a slightly different way, or release a little bit of some shame they've been holding on to over something that was a perfectly natural emotion, albeit perhaps in an unfortunate situation or a time of their lives. And that's really, I think, all we can do as writers. We can't control the larger narratives. And I do think that, you know, the literary world is enormous and very capacious, and there's space for all kinds of stories. Some of them are going to be much more, you know, drawn from these big momentous events, and some of them are going to be much more personal and political in that way, and that there's room for all of it. So I think that, you know, my biggest concern with this book was, and I think I'm over that now, but just imagining, you know, certain kinds of readers getting a hold of the book and in that inability to be nuanced, getting upset over a crush over a 12-year-old, or, you know, the essay I write about the romance of mothering a boy. But I just think you can always, as a writer, imagine worst case scenarios, but you just have to do your work and then move on.
Right. Well, as your reader, where I'd like to engage in this conversation, in this particular point, is that the particular pieces that you just talked about, like that's what happens in them, but what they are about are these greater questions that we need right now in the world, right? Like even that profound moment that I had, like casing the circumference of my apartment, thinking about little you not being able to make her girl Barbie's kiss, and then asking yourself, God, what other truths have I missed in the world?
Right.
Let's ask that question right now of the world,
exactly,
and of our current political and cultural conversation. Right. And so I love, in that sense, of what a personal essay can do. It's the question that you asked. Oh, y'all, you want to talk about how to end an essay? This is a great bookend, right? Like I would give myself an A right now if I were doing this, because like it's back to the question that you asked the kids at Nerd Camp. What is the big idea here? And the big idea of a book about love and how we need to expand its definition is a conversation that fits into every single conversation right now that we're having in the world.
Yes.
So I would just like to say that I am desperately in love with you in this book, and I think that we need it very, very much. I am so grateful for this conversation. All of these wonderful friends here in the chat, I can't see your faces, but we all adore you so much. I think that is our time, but I think, yes. Kaylee, hi.
Hello, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. It feels like a little balm on a week or month, life, year, world as intense as this one. So thank you so much, Megan and Michelle. Another encouragement to buy the book if you'd like, personalization, make sure you're registered to vote, engage in whatever activism means to you. And thank you so much, everyone. It's been a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.